Good morning, everyone. How's everyone feeling today? It's a beautiful Saturday morning, right?
Say thanks for coming out on a Saturday morning. We know that can be difficult for many, so we appreciate it extra, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes, Saturday mornings can be hard if people have been out socially connecting the evening before, right?
Right. Or maybe it's the start of a nice weekend of socializing. So we appreciate you guys coming out and starting on a good note, I hope. And so we thought we would start off by, so Deb and I had this conversation before on where we live. And I think it's really interesting that we're talking about how we live today through social connections. And from that conversation, we talked about how this idea of loneliness is no longer an idea. It's actually up in the federal level, talked about nationally. Our own U.S. surgeon has labeled this as an epidemic, loneliness. So I just wanted to pose to Deb, why is that important that we are talking about it on a national level? And is there any movement there to keep the conversation going?
Sure. And, before I answer that, I think I'll just explain a little bit about who I am and my background. So I am not a clinical psychologist. I am not a social scientist. I am someone who spent nearly 30 years in the property casualty insurance industry, retired from that industry about a decade ago, and started giving back to the community in a variety of ways, and watched a family member go through a really difficult period of time before he passed away, dealing with loneliness, and started doing some research on my own. What is this? What's happening here? And lo and behold, it's been a problem for decades. It's been growing as a problem. And I thought, okay, I need to find a nonprofit in the state of Connecticut that's focused on this issue, and I couldn't find one. And so decided to launch For All Ages. So I just want to lay the groundwork with that, and I think it's important to understand that I am just like all of you, right? I'm someone that simply cares about community, simply cares about family and friends, and I've taken some action to try to make an improvement where I can. So thank you for that question, Catherine. When we're talking about loneliness certainly has been around for decades. The research goes back decades, and it's worldwide research. And I can tell you that what we have learned is that the United Kingdom and Japan are far ahead of the United States in thinking about this issue. But we're catching up, which is really great to hear about. So the Surgeon General declared loneliness a public health crisis about a year ago now, May of 2023. And that was based upon his evaluation of hundreds of pieces of research across the world on what is happening, not only in the world, but what's happening here in the United States, and why are we feeling so disconnected? And if anyone has heard Dr. Vivek Murthy speak, you will hear that he speaks from the heart. He speaks about his own loneliness growing up in his own family, and some of the disconnection that he felt, and why he, as a physician, has been really thoughtful around social connection as he sees patients, because he recognizes that there's a connection, right, between social health and social connectivity and our mental and our physical health. So Senator Chris Murphy, one of Connecticut's senators, certainly has taken the lead federally on trying to get the Senate to move forward with some regulation around loneliness and social connection and social media, and I'm sure we'll be talking more about that over the next hour. But one of the things that we've done here in the state of Connecticut is a year ago started convening what's called the Connecticut Collaborative to End Loneliness. So it's a statewide initiative where we're really focused on improving social connection for people of all ages. And one of the important things is reducing stigma, which I think we'll talk about too.
And before we get any further, I just want to take a really quick icebreaker break and ask the audience, is this something that you think about? Raise your hand if you're, got it. Oh, all right. Full house, I think, something you think about. You can't hear me? My question was, is this a topic that you think about? Loneliness. Yeah, something you think about. So it's prevalent in all of our minds. And so I figure we can kind of kick off this conversation by talking about our theme today, which is social health is the foundation of our mental and physical health. And I think oftentimes we think, okay, socializing. So going out to dinner with friends or even a book club, like why is that such a big deal? Can you talk about the mental aspect of it and how that connection can really help or, increase, I don't know, serotonin or dopamine or whatever that works?
Sure. So again, I'm not a physician, but I will do my best. So the social health, it may be a new term for a lot of people. It is all about the dimension of our health and our well-being that comes from connection and comes from community. And social connection really is, as you mentioned, the foundation of our mental and physical health. And the key is that sense of belonging that we get when we're socially connected with others, or maybe even just one person, and having a one-on-one dialogue and feeling like we belong, like the person hears us and that we belong. And that sense of connectivity, that positive connectivity, is really what's important. So it's not about volume of connections. It's really about the impact that the connection is having on us personally. So social connection is certainly a root cause, or lack of social connection, my apologies, is a root cause of things from anxiety to depression to substance abuse. It's been shown to be a root cause of gun violence and of domestic violence. And so from a mental health perspective, we know that being socially connected and feeling good about our connections day in and day out acts as a protective factor for us against loneliness and against us suffering from some of these mental health issues, starting with anxiety and depression.
So basically you're telling me to not cancel my plans.
Don't cancel your plans, no.
Well,
be intentional about making those plans.
Yes, that's something that I'm thinking about as we're sitting here too. And I'm thinking we're making a social connection just by being in this room together. I see nodding of heads, and I think it's a wonderful thing, right, on this Saturday morning. Absolutely. And so we mentioned mental health. So what about the physical health? How are they connected somehow?
So again, not being a physician, I will do my best. A lot of the research that has been done over the past decade on the importance of social connection to our physical health has been focused on older adults. And some of that research shows, for instance, that socially connected people really build this protective factor within our bodies that help ward off various physical ailments. And loneliness, which I guess we'll talk about the definition in a moment, but loneliness is a root cause of, for older adults, heart disease, right? 29% higher probability of developing heart disease if you are a lonely older adult, 32% higher probability of having a stroke. And for me, the big one is 50% higher probability of developing some form of dementia. And so for all of the funding and all of the research, which is all incredibly important, that goes into Alzheimer's, for instance, we as community members, and as everyone sitting here today, has the opportunity to help not only ourselves, but to help our family and help our friends from developing some form of dementia simply through social connection. Which, that was a light bulb moment for me when I read that study, and I had to go back again and read it a couple of times to be sure that I was understanding it. And then when our Surgeon General spoke of it, and I said, okay, I've understood it correctly, that there is a causal connection here. And I think when we think about the pandemic, right, and we think about seeing older adults, for instance, in adult living communities, and we weren't if any of you had an older adult in an adult living community as a family member, you weren't able to get in and see them, right? Maybe you only were able to wave to them through the window, or you were able to have a phone call with them. But we know that dementia has spiked as a result of the pandemic. And I think we're going to continue to see that being problematic. But the good thing is we can do something about it, and it doesn't cost anything.
Right. And I think that will come back to intentionality, right? Especially if we're having this conversation,
Right.
we're having this conversation together. Perhaps it was not something that you're thinking about. Maybe you'll think about it after this, hopefully. And but we also want to talk about the stigma of talking about loneliness. I mean, look at us. We're here talking about it in a public space, and you're here to talk about it as well. But it's actually something that people don't want to talk about. So can you talk about the stigma and what does that look like, and how do people talk about it?
Yes, thank you for that. Let me first explain what loneliness is. So, whether you are a clinician or a news reporter, people tend to use the term isolation and loneliness as though they are the same thing, and they are not. And the way that I'd love everyone to think about it is that isolation can be very objectively observed, right? So either someone is isolated and not around other people, or they are around other people and are not isolated. So it's very objective. Loneliness is a feeling. It's that feeling that we don't have the amount of positive social connection in our lives that provide us with that sense of belonging and community and connection. So that's the difference between loneliness and isolation. Loneliness cannot be clinically diagnosed. And it's one of the things that we have been working on with the Connecticut Collaborative to End Loneliness is bringing clinicians together to start to screen for loneliness and what does that look like. And it really has to be admitted to. So as far as the stigma, there is definitely a stigma associated with loneliness. And I'm so glad to see people here willing to learn about it. No matter where I go, what we find is that young adults are more apt and more willing to talk about loneliness. I believe it's because they've grown up in this space of being comfortable talking about their mental health. Older adults tend to not want to talk about the stigma or talk about loneliness as much. I would love for everyone to think about it the same way you think about hunger. When you're hungry, it simply means you need food. And when you're lonely, it simply means you need social connection, positive social connection in your life. And, we, as each of us, can do something about reducing the stigma simply by talking about it. So I'd like to actually, if we can do this, maybe we can get some audience participation here. Has anyone here ever felt lonely? Raise your hand. Most people. All right. So I think if you had looked around when you raised your hands, you would see that most people in the room have felt some loneliness at some point in their life. And it's a human condition, right? So as humans, we are hardwired to be social. We're social beings. And when we are lacking that social connectivity that's critical to us, we start to feel lonely. And you shouldn't be ashamed of that. It simply means you need to make a change in your life and get some positive social connection.
I'm also wondering if this is something that maybe through conversation, maybe yourself or when you're speaking with somebody else, have you ever had a chat where someone's like, I didn't think I needed the social connection, but actually you do. Because this is an anecdote that I share. Before I became a reporter with Connecticut Public, I was working on a newspaper, and this was during the lockdown. So that was a really fun time. And I did not bake a single sourdough bread. I did not do a single puzzle. That's how busy I was. I was doing 4, 5, 6 stories a day in a very small staff. But at the time I was thinking I wasn't bored because at some point I was getting social connection. I was talking to people almost every day. And then when we were able to go out a bit more, I went out, talked to people, and all that jazz. But it actually wasn't until I think it was 2021 that my husband and I did a road trip and met some friends. And we did a camping trip. And I had a very visceral moment of realization. I was sitting on a couch. I was with a friend. We're just chatting. And I just had a shock go through my body like, this is actually what I needed. I thought I was having social connection. I think I was, to a certain extent, but it wasn't until it was in a non-work environment that my brain kind of exploded and was like, that's actually, I didn't realize I needed that social connection. And it was a great trip after that when I connected that's what I needed. So is that common as I'm asking you this live?
It's very common. So I think what happens is that we believe we're getting the amount of social connection that we need. We may feel good about it. We feel comfortable living our lives day in and day out. And then something really super positive takes place, right? Connecting with people that you haven't seen in a while, or connecting with, whether it's a family member or a friend, where something really clicks and you realize, wow, this is really giving me this sense of belonging that I didn't realize I was missing. We hear it all the time. Actually,
that makes me feel a little bit better about myself. And so we've been talking about the fact that loneliness is an epidemic, and we have stats from research based from Cigna that there are two populations that from this study that has shown are the two populations that experience loneliness the worst. And the first population is our younger population, ages 18 to 22. And the second population is our older population, ages 70 plus. So I just want to throw it out there real quick. How many of you are surprised by this study, the two populations? A little bit? Okay, got some hands.
Yeah, that surprises a lot of people, actually. It surprised me when I first read it. And I went back to Cigna and I asked them to explain. And sure enough, they had all the data, and they had it. It was all legitimate. That it's that young adult population, age 18 to 22, is reporting their loneliness at the highest level. And when we go out and talk with students, college students or young adults who are not going on to college and going an alternative route, they talk about the fact that they grew up with this built-in social connection, right? So they had their family at home. They grew up with friends, and they graduated high school with the same group of friends that they had known for more than a decade, right? And then it all ends, and they're thrust into the world. And if they go to college, they have to find their new world. They have to find their new connection and friends and make friends. Or if they don't go on to college, they then are left with, okay, many of my friends going on to college, and I'm not going that route. And so how do I get my social connectivity? It's a great example of a transition period in our lives that causes loneliness. And it's also tied to social media, which I think we'll talk about in a minute. But do you want me to talk about the transition periods now?
Go ahead. Yeah, let's do it.
So one of the things that we know is that transition periods in our lives are the times when we can feel the loneliest. And I think it makes sense when you think about it, right? So whether you are going off to college for the first time, and you're, like I said, you're thrust into this new world where you know no one, and you're expected to make friends and figure out who do you have a common connection and common interest with, or whether you're starting a new job, moving to a new city, moving to a new state, new moms are significantly suffering from loneliness. And, we know a little bit about that. People have been talking about, in general, new moms, they're suffering because, well, first of all, just the stress and the exhaustion of having this new little human that you have to care for. But also, if the mom was working, presumably was working, now she's home alone. And she's lost that social connection that she got used to going into work every day and being around her work colleagues. And so that's significant. I can tell you caregivers are also now being talked about, which I feel great about, because so many of us are caregivers for older adults. When you become a caregiver, you sort of put your own health aside and you're focused on caring for a loved one. And caregivers are some of the loneliest people, and we as community members need to do more to care for our caregivers. Retirement is another time where people, they get so excited about retiring, and again, they leave behind the colleagues that they got to know, and they're home. And the first 6 months is fantastic, and then after those 6 months, people start saying, "Okay, what is my purpose, right? And what am I to do from here?" And I've actually told my husband he's not allowed to retire until he figures out his next role. Like, what is he going to do? What is it going to be? I don't care what it is, but it needs to be something where he can have a purpose and where he can get some social connection.
And a really great example that you need to have these conversations and questions asked before the thing is done.
Yes.
In terms of your husband retiring.
Yes,
so
absolutely.
Have a plan, everyone, if that's something that you're thinking
Have a plan.
of. Yeah. And we talked about transitions, and because we were talking about younger people and how we were a little surprised that ages 18 to 22 is actually the ages that are experiencing loneliness the most. So talking about transitions, college is one, and in some ways college can act as a support system. Hopefully you're able to find friends or professors or clubs that you can be a part of. But that is a support system that's in place in terms of that kind of transitions. So what about young people who may not have that system, for those who may not go to college or whatever their next steps are, what can the adult or grown up or whoever who may be within that space of the young person, what can they do to help them out?
And what I would say is, as parents, we need to encourage our, say, 18 to 25-year-old who may not be going on to college to be really thoughtful about what types of hobbies and interests, and whether it's joining a running club or a photography club, get involved, volunteer. Volunteering is one of the best ways to get connected with others that have similar interests and have that sense of purpose and give back to your community. But there are ways that people can connect socially, but it comes back to being intentional about it. And as parents, we need to be really thoughtful about how can we support our young adults and fostering that social connectivity for themselves.
We're always looking for new hobbies, so if you have anything to suggest, please throw them our way. We want to hear them. And we talked about the older generation as well. 70 plus is the second population that experiences loneliness the worst under our
Yes.
younger people. So can you talk about that a little bit? What do you
Sure.
think that is?
Sure. Well, I think we can all probably think about the fact that as we grow older, some of our friends and family members start to pass away. And that 70 plus population, if we're so lucky to be 70, 80, 90 years old, we're going to lose a lot of our friends who weren't so lucky, right? Who passed away due to, whatever health reasons there were. And so we're not only losing our family and our core support network of cousins and parents and all of that, but we start to lose our friends also. This is what happened to the family member that I spoke about early on. Is he was very socially connected to a group of fishing buddies, and one by one they started to pass away, and he was the last. He used to say, "I'm the last one standing," and now I'm fishing alone, and so that happens. And that can happen. It's one of the reasons to foster intergenerational connections, especially as we get older, to foster those connections with people that are younger than us. I know it sounds sort of morbid, but statistically, they're more likely to still be around as you age, and can provide that helpful social connection.
we love intergenerational friendships. One of my family friends, she's around, I want to say 35, and one of her besties, as she calls her, is 85. And the 85-year-old aunt is what we call her too, always jokes about how like learning young lingo helps her a lot. She's always learning the next thing. And so it really helps her brand. I mean, she's 85 and sprightly. Like you would not be able to tell that she's 85. And she actually says
It's fantastic.
I know, right? It's goals. But it's those conversations that she's like, it's better than doing a crossword. Like it's better than doing a puzzle because she's actively connecting with this person. And because the person literally has a different language, so she has to keep up. And then the younger person also learns patience and teaching her aunt the language that she's using. And it's just this beautiful friendship. I think you get more out of it than you think. At first you thought, oh, just friends and you're just hanging out, but you're actually getting more.
Intergenerational connection is, we call it sort of the icing on the cake. So not only are you getting the social connection, right, that provides all of the value of that's providing that sense of belonging and connectivity to help our health, our mental and physical health. But we're getting, as older adults, we're able to mentor someone and have a sense of purpose and share our wisdom and share our experience. And, for the young adults or for a child, right, is whatever age group we're talking about, that younger person, they're getting a mentor. And they're able to talk with someone who isn't their mom or their dad, which can be really positive, for sure. Intergenerational connection is one of those magical things that helps us understand each other better. And exactly what you were saying, right? So, you get to learn a little bit, as an older adult, you get to learn a little bit about what it's like to be a young adult growing up, right, in 2024. What does it look and feel like? Because it's certainly different from when an older adult was growing up. And vice versa. For All Ages has an intergenerational program. There's actually a rack card outside, and it connects a college student with an older adult age 55 plus during the college semester for a weekly phone call. And it's simple, right? And we pair two people based on common interests that they share in their application. We facilitate their growth of a friendship via weekly phone calls. And we provide conversation starters every week so people have something to talk about. And what we hear at the end is not only from the older adults about what a positive influence this has been on their life, but from the young adults who say, gosh, I was having a tough time this semester and I couldn't talk to my parents, but I had someone to talk to. It's just been tremendous as far as tackling ageism, which for anyone who may be around this afternoon to listen to Donna Fetus and Ashton Applewhite, they're going to be talking more about ageism. But not only from that perspective, but just that magic of that connection taking place.
We had a set of friendship, I guess I can call it that, on the show when you did our Where We Live show last fall. And one of the things that I remember is so actually I believe the older, she's an aunt that's like 85 years old, actually. It's not the same person, I swear. And I remember she mentioned that was something that she was looking forward to. Because I believe she was someone who was living in a senior living facility, and the phone call was something she looked forward to every week with the college student.
Yes.
And the college student shared that she loved us because of the wisdom that she was getting. And
Yes.
actually, as we're talking, I was just thinking an experience I had when I was in my early 20s. I was just starting off my career. I was a newspaper reporter in Santa Barbara, California, and I was on this art tour. So you can go to this house and like check out their place, which was really cool. But I will never forget a conversation I had with somebody who was in their 70s. And he shared that he's always wanted to be an artist, but couldn't make a living out of being an artist. So he did a day job for, say, 40 years, and now he can do whatever he wants because he's retired. And I was about 23, 24 at the time, and it struck me hard. I still remember it to this day, obviously, but it gave me a sense of hope that, oh yeah, you don't have to do the thing by the time you're 30 or 40 or 50. But that was what I got from this older person. And I needed someone outside of my parents' space to tell me that, right? But I was able to get that because of my work. So it's just a beautiful moment for me.
Yeah, I think as we're living longer, and we're thinking about not only, our second chapter, but our third chapter and our fourth chapter, it gives us the ability, I feel, to have more freedom and more flexibility. So I'm getting up to the point where For All Ages considers older adults age 55 plus. I'm 59, so I guess I'm in that older adult population now. But I feel like I have so much to learn from some of the people that I have met via For All Ages that are in their 80s and 90s, right? That's a different generation than my generation. And there's still so much wisdom. And, one of my favorite volunteers that I've been fortunate enough to meet and get to know via For All Ages is a 92-year-old retired physician who takes classes every semester at Central Connecticut State University. And he does pottery classes, he does metalworking classes. He actually has a show coming up at CCSU in the fall where he's got this huge space and all of his artwork is going to be shown. And he is one of the most vibrant individuals that I have ever met. And he will say, it's the social connection that I get by going to class, connecting with the younger students, and just being able to have this purpose that keeps me going and keeps me aging well.
What I'm getting out from this is next time I decide to take a nap, I should probably not. So I'll think about it. I'll think about him and actually get up and do something, is what I'm getting from this. And we've talked about the younger generation, the older generation. What about demographics? Because we also know from studies that men deal with loneliness very differently from women,
yes.
and the impacts are also very different. Can you touch on that a little bit?
Yes. So the research shows that men tend to be lonelier than women. Certainly that's a generalization, but what the research shows is that men tend to not be intentional about having social connection and fostering social connection in their lives. Men tend to be, sort of the solo guys that are just doing their thing and don't really, in some cases, I've had men say, I don't know how to make friends. Like, no one has ever taught me how to do this. Like, what do I do? How do I go out and where do I start? And what I say is start where your passion lies. Right? So pick that area, whatever your passion is, whether you love to play the guitar or you really enjoy, rock music or whatever it is. Photography. Photography is a big one where because people of all ages can participate in it, people tend to pick up photography really at any age of their lives. And when you join a photography club, it's one of the most inclusive clubs that you can find because everyone's helping each other, which I didn't realize before I started this job, of fostering social connection here, that photographers are just great at social connection. There's a lot of men that are photographers and that find their sense of connection and community via a local photography club.
And on that note, really helping each other improve social connection and connectivity. I mean, photographers make so much sense to me just because in this space, it's kind of our jobs to go out to a person and randomly introduce ourselves. And when I tell my friends that, they're like, absolutely not. I do not want to do that. But I kind of do that for a living, so I don't have a choice. And so with that in mind too, because approaching people, it can be scary and you don't know what you're going to get from the other person. Right. They might think you're just this creeper coming up, right? I feel like that sometimes. I promise I'm not. I'm just really interested in you. But how do we actually do that and help each other improve that social connection when maybe you have a friend that has a hard time approaching new people, or you yourself maybe you're like, I don't know if I have any interest, so I don't know if I want to go to a photography club or a chess club or whatnot. So what do you do in that space?
So and we get that question a lot actually. Where do I start? Sort of question. And I think the answer is reaching out to a friend to go somewhere with you, right? And actually having a phone call, right? So actually picking up the telephone and asking a person to attend an event with you. We know that loneliness, it doesn't matter whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, loneliness is, universal. And it's not that introverts are lonelier. That's not the case at all. It's not what the research shows. It really is about having the comfort in being able to step into a new space. And what we know is that when you can step into a new space with a friend, you've got that buddy, and you're more likely to do it. And so we always say, reach out to someone. Reach out to a friend. If you want to go attend an event like today, perhaps you had a friend reach out to you and say, "Will you come with me?" Right? Did anyone here have a friend reach out to them? Right? So there's some people here that said, "Yeah. Well, will you come with me to this event?" That's good. You did a good job, right? Like that's what we want. We want each other to be helping one another. One of the things there's one of my little props here. So the more we get together, the happier we'll be. Is one, you guys are laughing, right? Some people recognize it. I'm not going to try to sing it because I can't sing, but some of you may recognize it. Catherine, you said you recognized it, right?
Yeah, we were talking about Girl Scouts.
Yeah, Girl Scouts.
Barney,
yeah,
Sesame
Barney,
Street. I think
Girl
these are all
Scouts.
places that we've heard this, right?
Yeah, so this was actually a poem that was written by a poet in the United Kingdom more than 100 years ago. He was asked to craft a little jingle for a children's charity to try to get people to foster donations. And he came up with this poem, "The more we get together, the happier we'll be," and it goes on. You guys probably know it. And it was all about, the children's charity was all about fostering social connection for children more than 100 years ago. And so people have been talking about social connection on and off, a little bit for more than a century. And if you remember nothing else from today's talk, remember this, because this is really what life is all about. And that's really what we're talking about today, is that positive social connection and helping each other foster it.
And we've been talking more in-person events, I think. Even picking up a phone call, it's a physical thing that you have to do. And I know certain people, that is actually a barrier. Like, I don't want to pick up that phone and call somebody or go out to go and do a certain thing. And we mentioned social media earlier, so I want to touch on that a little bit, because I think it can be a good or a bad thing depending on the user. But talk about how that plays a role in the social connection, because I grew up in a generation where the internet didn't exist when I was a kid. And by the time I was in high school, dating myself here, but I had to wait for an entire evening on 56K internet to download a movie trailer and watch the next morning to get me going and want to go to school. And so that didn't exist for me as a kid, but now,
Nor did it exist for me.
right? And so, but I have very positive experiences with social media as an adult. Facebook happened when I went to college. It was still when it was EDU, so you had to have an EDU email address to have Facebook. And I connected with I'm from California. I went to school in Washington State. I was the only student that was an out-of-state student in my core. And so I guess that's a kind of loneliness I was experiencing without realizing. And I was able to find community from social media. And then as an adult, I'm also able to find community through different spaces, and it's also all ages. But I also know that's a very specific experience. I came with it with a lot of intention, but it can also be used in all kinds of ways. So can you talk about that, right?
Yes.
Like, it really depends on the user, it seems like.
It does. And so I guess where I would start is certainly social media has some positives to it. Right? It gives us the ability to connect with people that may not be physically located near us. It gives us the ability to connect with people that have common interests. But I think just like anything else, when taken to the extreme, that's when there starts to have some detrimental impacts. And, especially for our youth and our children that have grown up with phones and social media, there haven't been enough guardrails around how much time people are spending on social media, The business of social media, and I don't want to get too political here, but the business of social media is all about keeping people connected and scrolling, scrolling, scrolling. And it takes us away from the social connections that we need in our lives. Certainly, Vivek Murthy, our U.S. Surgeon General, just last week started asking Congress to think about putting warning labels, mandating warning labels on social media. And it's because it's going to help parents who are raising their hands saying, I need some help monitoring this. And I feel this peer pressure to let my children continue to be on social media 24/7 because all of their friends get to do it. And so for a number of reasons, I think he's putting that forth, and I know that Congress has been talking about that. But it's just when we take it to the extreme, right? So we know that teens that spend 3 hours or more a day on social media have a doubling of the probability of suffering from anxiety and depression, right? So I think everyone needs to understand that it's a highlight reel of our lives, right? What we see is not it's not authentic to who that whole person is. It's just a highlight reel. But for youth and for teens that haven't matured to understand that, they see it and then they think, well, gee, I'm not good enough. I don't measure up to that. And then that starts them feeling, well, I'm feeling a little disconnected and I'm feeling lonely. And it's this downward spiral that can really start to happen. There is a middle school in Manchester, Connecticut. I saw this on the news. I don't know if anyone else did a couple of months ago, where they implemented these little pouches for kids that came into the middle school at the beginning of the day. They would put their phones in a pouch. The pouch was locked. They could not unlock it until the end of the day. There was a little magnet on the wall, and it unlocks their phone. And when the news reporter went out to interview, what ended up happening is that the kids said, thank you for doing this. Like, we love this because now I get to talk to my friends, right? And so kids they really are pining for reasons to put their phone away, and as our parents doing that too. So it's something that I think we all ought to be thinking about, spending less time on our phones.
Well, I can imagine if you grew up with a phone in your hand, it's hard to remember that you can leave it, right? I mean, even I forget sometimes, like, it's okay to leave your phone behind. It's not gonna cause anything.
Yeah, I have an example for last night. The storms that came through knocked out our power. I live up in Greater Hartford, and a lightning strike knocked out the power. And 4 hours into it, my husband was looking at Eversource on his phone as though he was going to will the power to come back. And I said, put your phone down and let's go out into the backyard. And we went out into the backyard, and everything was dark because no one in the neighborhood had power. And the lightning bugs, like the fireflies, were just magical. Yes. And we spent 25 minutes just sitting out there, just talking, and just enjoying the fireflies. And we would have never done that, right, if the TV were on and, if we had been focused on our phones.
Well, one of my favorite first world problem is when the power goes out and you're forced to not be on your phone because you want to conserve. And I would read by candlelight. It's so romantic, right? But then you realize there's a reason why everyone's eyesight was really bad way back when. So that's right. That was my discovery. So we took out the camping lamp instead. So I want to leave some room for questions, but just lastly, because we mentioned the pandemic, and I do want to touch on how loneliness is an issue that was already in conversation before the pandemic, before the lockdown happened, but certainly because of what's been going on, it has been exacerbated. And so what are your thoughts about that? And also in terms of looking ahead,
yes.
What can we do to, mend the exacerbation maybe, or even just start that social connection as we've been talking about this morning?
Yes. We've been talking to a lot of librarians who have said we're offering more programs than we ever have, and we're struggling with having our community members come in and engage with them. And we talk to people who say, I think I've forgotten how to reach out to people and how to connect because I got so comfortable, right, just being at home. And I think, we know that the pandemic caused loneliness to creep up to around 85%, right? So it's back down to only an epidemic level at around 61%. But it went up to 85% during the pandemic, but many people are still stuck in this space where they haven't really reached out to people. I guess one of the things that I would say is think about someone that you haven't reached out to in 6 months or a year or 2 years or 3 years, and call them today. When you leave here, just make a phone call. Reach out to someone, and don't start it with an apology of, I'm sorry I haven't talked to you in 3 years. Start it with, I was thinking about you today, and I wanted to call you to check in and see how you're doing, because it makes such a world of difference.
And don't cancel those plans.
Right.
So I wanted to take a moment to see if we have any questions from the audience. I don't know if there's a mic or if we want to yell out the question. Do our event coordinators have any opinions on that? Probably not. All right, we're waiting for mics.
Okay.
So while we're waiting for mics, we can continue, right?
We can continue. We'll keep talking.
So I mean, with talking about the pandemic and social media, because I think social media played a really big role in helping us connect because we were disconnected. So can you talk about, because I think social media, unfortunately, is one of those places that there's so much negative around it for good reason, but there's also positives.
There are certainly positives with social media. There are so many people that are able to connect. I think, as I mentioned before, connecting with people that have common interests and being able to connect with people in other parts of the world has been something that's been just fantastic. Certainly, when I think about social media, I'm also thinking about Zoom and the ways that we can virtually connect and see one another, albeit flat screen, but we can now connect with people across the world at any time that we would like. And I can remember growing up, and when I was in college, there was one phone in the dorm.
Same. Yep.
One phone, and my designated time to call my parents once a week was 7 p.m. on Sunday evening. That was the time slot I was given, and that's just the way the dorm worked. Everybody got a time slot, and that's when you'll call your parents, if you so chose. And so social media gives us the opportunity to be connected and to learn, right? We certainly can learn from what we're seeing gets posted and published, and certainly NPR and other opportunities to podcasting, and all of that is really positive. The negative, I think, comes not only from people using it too much, but there are predators out there. Right, and there are people that are some unsavory individuals that are looking to take advantage of us, and in various ways. And I think we just need to be really cautious around that, and really be thoughtful around how do we mitigate that risk.
Well, and on that, and just to leave a learning experience I had, and talking about the college experience, I did have to teach both of my parents to use AIM. Do you guys remember AIM Messenger? That was really a test to my patience. So I'm just owning it today that I did do a step-by-step with my parents. You click on File and Preferences, get your screen name in. It was a fun time. And then just another, it was also flip phone era. It was T9. Do you guys remember T9? So you have to click on the thing to change the capitalization. My mom didn't know how to change capitals. So she basically yelled at me for 6 months. And so I had to help her change it when I went home for winter vacation. So this is kind of another kind of intergenerational friendship with my parents that I had that also taught me a lot from the experience.
That's so funny, Catherine.
So I think there are some microphones ready to go. All right. I'll leave it to you.
Lots of questions.
Yeah.
Hello. Thank you for the presentation and discussion. So I've worked with teenagers a good amount, and so I really appreciated the discussion around demographics of loneliness, especially around young men and masculinity. And so just thinking about that, that's something I've always been really interested in and think about as in a mentor role. And so I was just wondering if you had any more that could share about what it is potentially that you think about masculinity and manhood that leads to this kind of disparagement in social connections, and what as like parents or mentors we can do to help support young men in like being able to have fulfilling relationships.
You gonna take that? You
Well,
want
no,
me
I
to
was
take
going to say earlier we were talking about
Yeah.
men experiencing it differently. So
Yes.
specifically young men too.
Yes.
You know, so how does that work in that space?
Yeah, you know, I think we need to just ensure that our young adults and our teens are comfortable reaching out to others and starting a dialogue, and be comfortable using telephones. You know, one of the things that I think we don't do a good enough job as parents, and I'm just as guilty, is teaching our youth to be comfortable making a phone call. It's one of the things that we find with our T3 intergenerational friendship community is that we've had some young adults, especially some freshmen in college, say to us, "This was the first time I ever made a phone call on the telephone. I have received calls from my parents and from others, but I've never really gotten comfortable making a phone call, and it took some time for me to get comfortable and knowing what to say even on the telephone." So I think that's a space where we can do better, and we can help one another with that, especially the teens and adolescents. I also think that I feel like today is better than it was 50 years ago, where people are talking about mental health, right? And it's more open, and we're being more willing to share when we're having a problem. And so I would just do everything I could to foster that, foster the willingness to have authentic conversations and be comfortable sharing who you are, and admitting, right, I feel lonely, or I don't know how to do XYZ, whatever it is, just having the comfort of being able to share, I think goes a long way.
Thank you for that question. Who's up next?
Early on, you mentioned that the incidence of loneliness is different in Europe and in Japan, and they're doing better in dealing with it. And any specifics about programs and how much is governmental versus nonprofits?
Yes. So let me just clarify. The statistics around loneliness in the United States and throughout the world are consistent. But the United Kingdom and Japan started thinking about this years ago. UK, for a decade ago, they developed the Minister of Loneliness, and it's a governmental position, and it's over all of the United Kingdom. And so there is a governmental department that has been fostering social connection for people of all ages. And what they've asked community members to do is to think about what can they do for their own community? What can they do for their neighborhood and their community? What can they start? There's been men's walking clubs that have started. There have been grocery stores that have instituted a slow line, and that's for people that just want to talk, right? And so I'm serious. This is happening, and so and there's a long line, and everyone in that line knows that they're just going to be patient because they're going to get their turn and having that social connection. So there are those types of things that have been going on now for a good decade over in the United Kingdom. Japan also similarly started something about 5 or 6 years ago, and they've been fostering it. Change happens locally. We know that, right? So change happens within our own community, within our neighborhood. And I think what Japan and UK have done a really good job of is educating all of the residents to say, okay, I can foster this change for myself, for my friends, for my community, and getting people engaged and thinking about it. If there's a flyer outside, and it's the For All Ages Flourish Challenge, if anybody picked that up on the way in, or maybe pick it up on your way out, it's our little challenge to get people to be thinking about, how do I foster social connection in my community? And then it drops down a level to my neighborhood, and then to my family level. And it's really just to kickstart the conversation.
I actually really love those examples because it shows that it's kind of the little things in life, the little
Yes.
social connections that
Yes.
have the big impact.
Yes.
Because I have some pretty like funny cashier interactions every once in a while, occasionally at a TSA, but you don't want to piss them off too much. But I feel like that's kind of key, because also for those who may not want to do the big thing, like going to a club or joining an organization that can feel really intimidating, even picking up a phone
Yes.
call.
Yes.
I mean, you probably wouldn't want to go to a grocery store if you don't want to pick up a phone. So, but that's a different conversation. But I feel like that. Does that make sense? Like the small things.
It's the small things that matter, right? It's the little touch points in our own lives that really make a positive difference. And, you know, as community members, we have the ability to right now to go to a library, look up the programs that are taking place, and to attend a program, to attend an adult learning class, right, with your local town or city. And it's those small steps, and it's the intentionality around taking the step, not only to foster your own social connection, but hopefully by doing so, right, social connection means you need at least two people. You're also helping at least one other person at the same time.
Great. So I think we have some time for a couple of more questions. Who's up next?
I just wondered if you could go back to something you said earlier, and I'm trying to figure out how this works. You said that caregivers tend to be lonely,
Yes.
and yet caregivers, and I'm thinking, of course, of people like nurses and people who care for elderly, are in contact with other people. So there must be, is there
let
something
me clarify.
fundamental about that that's
Yeah.
different?
Yes, my apologies. So when I was talking about caregivers, I was talking about unpaid caregivers. I was talking about the people that are caring for family members, right? So for instance, I am a part-time caregiver for my mom, right? And if I were a full-time caregiver for my mom, then I would be spending time living at her house 24/7 caring for her, right? And so there are many people that are unpaid caregivers, and that's what I was speaking about. Not paid caregivers, whose job, as you mentioned, part of their job is to foster social connection for those to whom we're providing care.
Thank you for very good talk. And I have a question regarding single people versus people that are married or otherwise committed relationships. I think it's a very different situation.
Well, certainly it's a different situation, because when you have a significant other, you automatically have, at least one other person to go do things with. But when you are single, it means that you've got to be more purposeful around thinking about fostering those social connections for yourself. And you've got to be willing to put yourself out there, right? You've got to be willing to go to that library program. You've got to be willing to come and attend an event like this. And you've got to be willing to have conversations with others. And it can make some people feel really uncomfortable, right? You mentioned taking that first step can be really uncomfortable. But I think what we find is that when you take that first step to have a conversation with someone else, the majority of the time, that person is more than willing to have the conversation. Like, you're not going to be shunned. And I think we just need to be, I think, more welcoming to one another, right? And more willing to have that intention to put ourselves out there, to have a conversation, and to reach out to someone. There is the research that's been done actually that says, when you walk by someone on the sidewalk and say hello, that in and of itself provides that boost of dopamine, not only to yourself, but to the other person, that helps elevate their mood, and puts them in a position of feeling more likely that they will then go out and say, and socially connect with someone else, which is just incredible. So it is different for sure, more difficult. And so you've got to be thoughtful around, how do I overcome that?
Becoming a journalist is helpful, just FYI. You start to get over that fear of approaching somebody that you don't know. Got another question?
Hi. Someone asked me once, do you ever get bored? And my answer was, I never get bored, but I do get lonely every once in a while.
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak a little to that? Where, I think of boredom and loneliness in very different ways, but some people think of them as being the same.
Well, yeah, no, they're not the same. They're not the same. I guess the first thing I would say is that some people really enjoy, and we probably all sometimes enjoy time alone, where we can refresh ourselves, right? That's solitude, and that's that feeling of, this is refreshing me and reinvigorating me, and it's my time and my space for myself. But that loneliness that one can feel when we're not getting the positive social connection that we need can cause us then to be thinking, well, gee, I'm not going to go out with my friends. And I mentioned the downward spiral of loneliness early, or that related to social media, but certainly it's related to social connection and in general, that when we're lonely, we tend not to want to step out of that. We start to live in it and get comfortable in it, and then we get bored. So there's a connection, but it's not the same concept. There's a connection, and then we get lonelier, right? And so we have to lift ourselves out of that intentionally, or we have to have someone pull us out of that downward spiral. Boredom means you're not focused on a certain hobby, or you're just, not doing much these days. Loneliness is all about lacking that positive social connection in our lives. I would do everything I could if you're feeling lonely to, take a step out and see what might be around in your local community that you can be a part of. Volunteering, I mentioned it briefly early on. Volunteering is one of the best ways. You are having a sense of purpose, and you're connecting with others that have a common interest. And I guarantee you, if you start volunteering, you won't be bored. They'll be calling you all the time to get more volunteering.
Thank you so much for that question. Really important distinction to make, I
Yeah.
think, between boredom and loneliness. Thank you very much. I think we have a question maybe for one more.
I know you touched on this before, but how does mental illness tie in with loneliness? Because both are epidemics, but I know they seem to be intertwined, especially for the young population. That might be why those numbers were higher, I was thinking. But as I've someone who suffered from it, not just depression, anxiety, but a plethora of different mental illnesses, and my family members, I've watched them go through it. I know loneliness is kind of like a problem because you might push people away, or you might do things that don't make sense that like just only add to your loneliness. I was wondering, I know it's a very complicated question, but is the answer to that just like talking more about it? Because it seems like, I don't know.
I think
Yeah.
that's a great first step. So first of all, thank you. Thank you for asking that question. So what we know is that anxiety and depression can cause us to not connect socially and to become lonely. And that loneliness then will exacerbate anxiety and depression and other mental illness. And so, similar to my answer previously, you've got to be willing to put yourself out there and step outside and say, okay, I'm going to take one step forward to connect with one person today. That's going to then hopefully foster a positive social connection for yourself. People that are suffering from anxiety and depression, as you mentioned, may be less likely to want to connect with others, but you've got to try. You've got to try, because I think what you're going to find when you reach out and connect with someone else is that you're going to have a welcoming ear. Even if it's just going out and, attending an event like this, or, going to, for a hobby, or even just going for a walk, right? So, we talk about social connection not costing anything, and it really doesn't. But if you pick up the phone and call someone and say, hey, what do you think about going for a walk today? Right? you might be surprised that you get the answer that, yeah, I'm happy to do that. Or maybe not today because I already have plans, but let's do it tomorrow, kind of thing. I think what we've heard from so many people as we've been out talking to people is that once someone takes a step, they are surprised at how easy it is to then take further steps. So it's like taking that first step is one of the most important.
Well,
I hope that helps. Yeah. Yeah, the way to reduce the stigma is everyone here being willing to talk about it with 2 or 3 other people, right? And what we're hoping is that this will have a ripple effect, because there shouldn't be a stigma. As I said, social connection is a basic human need. There shouldn't be a stigma around the fact that we all need it, because we all do.
Well, I want to thank you for that question, and thank you for helping to break that barrier today, actually, by
Yes.
taking that very first step. And I think we might be, when you're having a fun time, you got to end at some point. So I think we're at that point, but thank you all so much for coming out and joining us today. It was such a pleasure having you here, and appreciate you having that social connection with us today. And thank you, Deb.
Yeah.
Amazing. Applause for
Absolutely.
Deb.
Thank you all. Thank you. I don't know if we have any time left, but I think the one thing that I would say is that there's an old African proverb. Do I have time? No, I'm out of time. Okay, go.
Please.
Thank you, Denise.